This is part 3 of my presentation on post-World War II theological landscape. Parts 1 and 2, I have essentially discussed those who stand within, for the most part, the Protestant tradition, and how really from the 16th century, and more specifically in this presentation, World War II, a Calvinist tradition co-opted the evangelical tradition, and then the critique of that Calvinist tradition from within the evangelical tradition itself. I want to broaden out this, in this presentation, the discussion, and look increasingly so at the Roman Catholic tradition. Whether we talk about the evangelical or the Calvinist tradition and the critique of it or the acceptance of it, what is missing in that tends to be an approach to faith that has completely ignored or is unaware of, because of its lack of historic depth, the contemplative tradition of Christianity. And really for the first 1500 years of Christianity, and it continued thereafter, was the argument that the heart of faith is the vita contemplativa, and out of that comes the vita activa, or the active life. And so there has been a critique coming largely from the Roman Catholic tradition, and many have seen the legitimacy of this in the last 20, 30 years, of a call again to a deeper contemplative approach. Be still and know that I am God. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. But also a mining of the classical view of a meditative, contemplative approach, which emphasizes all the different ways of understanding the inner journey in a much more nuanced and subtle way. This reflects the interest in Taizé services and many other approaches, spiritual directing, a return to the great contemplative classics. Now, 3 important thinkers have emerged in the 20th century that embody and reflect that particular approach, and needless to say, there are many others, and I only have limited time to discuss them. One would be Thomas Merton, the second would be Bede Griffiths. Both are dead now, and then Richard Rohr is very, very much on the lecture circuit. All 3 of these thinkers, Merton is probably much more fully grounded in terms of the sheer breadth of Merton, his writing, his insights. There's no writer more prolific in terms of the contemplative approach, its relationship to the church and then politics, than any other writer, probably the 20th century. Bede Griffiths is very important in this also, in terms of interfaith issues, which Merton was engaged in, as is Richard Rohr. At the heart of the contemplative way is very much a critiquing the addiction to a hyper-drivenness and a hyper-rationalism of the West, which is so dominated from the 16th century forms of rationalism, scientism, theological confessionalism. And these contemplatives are trying to take people to a much deeper level of experience than, say, contemplative renewal people, which tend to focus more on the emotions, strangely warmed, intense feelings that somehow legitimate the presence of God when these intense feelings are not there. Where is God? The contemplative often takes people to dark places of the soul, dark nights of the soul, clouds of unknowing. Where is God in the silence and seemingly absence? When one goes through tragic places in their life, the contemplative attempting to grapple with that. Even yet deeper is what are those false places in ourselves that we identify with our true self? What are those interior parts of ourselves we must let go of, die to, bid adieu to? The contemplative is attempting to, and you'll get this in Merton, you'll get this in Bede Griffiths, you'll get it in Richard Rohr. What is what St. Paul would call the old Adam that must die, so the new Adam must resurrect. And so the contemplative journey is really about analyzing what must die, the subtle and crude features of what we are not, the resurrection of our new being in the church and in the world, an examination of the unio mystica, our experience, mystical union with God, in the Corpus Christi, the body of Christ, and then engaging in a prophetic critique in the world. And so the broader Roman Catholic tradition via Merton, Bede Griffiths, and Richard Rohr deepens, broadens, and fills out an understanding of Christianity today that in one sense the evangelical and Calvinist tradition have the best element are reaching towards, as people are many within the Reformed evangelical tradition are now going back beyond the 16th century, and they're encountering people like Thomas Merton, Bede, Griffiths, and Richard Rohr. And so this third section of our series is part of the rippling forth, the broadening out in terms of the greater tradition, or the great tradition of faith, and how can we then begin to look at the relationship then of the best elements of Roman Catholicism, which elements of Protestantism have spurned, and the best elements of the Protestant tradition. And the dialogue forward is a part of the ongoing theological landscape of post-World War II thought and politics.